Guys, 528 4.0, 12% of people with perfect stats every single year get rejected from every single medical school they apply to. I once posted this on TikTok and somebody in the comments tried to check me. They were like, actually, it's more like a 3.9 and a 520 or something like that, and they get rejected from 10% or something like that. This is a stat published by AAMC. You can check it out right here. It's a mind-blowing statistic, and it speaks to truly how holistic of a look that they're taking at medical school applicants. Now, what does it mean that 528 and 4.0 gets you rejected from all the schools you apply to every year for 12% of applicants? What does that mean? Does that mean that med school has become so incredibly competitive that even the people with the highest statistical profile possible are getting rejected? Obviously not. We know that's not true because the admissions rates for medical school applicants are, 44% in the last cycle? I mean, almost every 1 in 2 applicants that are applying to medical school are being admitted. So that tells us right there that it can't be also that, there are so many people applying with perfect scores across the board. We know that that's not true either. So it only leaves us with one reasonable conclusion. It's the same conclusion that med school admissions will tell you. It's the same conclusion that admissions committees across the country for medical schools will tell you. It's the same conclusion that admissions coaches, advisors like myself who really know med school admissions will tell you, and it's that admissions is taking a holistic look. It's not enough to have the statistical profile. Does it matter? Of course, everybody knows that, but this kind of age-old stigma or belief that it's all about the MCAT score, it's all about the GPA, it's all about the science GPA, it's boring at this point. It's really outdated. It's not true. It's, setting you up for disaster, for failure. Now, here's the problem. A lot of you hearing this are like, yeah, I know, I get it. I've heard it a million times. But many people think, well, you know what? What's really important, what they really care about, in addition to those things, is the personal statement, or is your clinical experience, or is your research, right? And everybody has their own bias. Everybody has their own kind of internal calculation about what admissions values or wants or cares about. And the reality is it's all of the above. The research can be really valuable to your application. You should be working as a medical assistant if you're applying to medical school. The personal statement, yes, it's absolutely critical, but so is the work and activities. So is the other relevant information response. So are your secondary essays. So are your interviews. So are the letters of continued interest you send when you get waitlisted at a school. So are the thank you emails that you follow up with after an interview, etc., etc. So let's talk about the 3 big stages of your application: primaries, secondaries, interviews. Just a very quick kind of review or rundown for people that aren't familiar with the stages, because a lot of you watching this may be freshmen, sophomores thinking about your upcoming application, or you may be even be a junior or senior studying hard for your MCAT right now and haven't really turned into AMCAS and started your account and looked into what's in there. And you may not be familiar with these 3 stages and what's expected of you during the written application. So let's talk about it very briefly. Primaries basically consists of the following. It's your personal statement, it's your work and activity section, and it's a other relevant information response. Personal statement, won't talk too much about it because most of you already have a general sense of what it is. 5,300 characters. Why physician? You better make sure that you're not just answering why healthcare, but why physician specifically. So if I could read your personal statement and it works perfectly for PA school, you've probably done a poor job. We'll maybe do another video in depth on personal statements. I think that's good enough for now. Let's talk about work and activities, because this is the one that a lot of people underutilize, underestimate, don't realize how long it is, how demanding it is, how important it is. So you get 15 activities. You get 700 characters per activity. That's about 125 words. We're talking about a mini essay here. It's a nice chunk-sized paragraph, maybe 2 smaller paragraphs. And then 3 of those you get to designate as your most meaningful experiences or your most meaningful activities. Those could be anything ranging from medical assisting, research, volunteering, shadowing, campus leadership, etc. You choose 3, you get an additional 1,325 characters, which is another about, let's say, 225 words to elaborate on why that particular experience is your most meaningful. Now, some people think that those 700 character descriptions are essentially a, written form of a resume. You're basically just letting admissions know what you've done in that role, not realizing how critical it is to integrate 1 or 2 sentences in there that really capture the key learnings, the impact, the takeaways that you've been able to glean or gain from that experience. You could talk about perhaps a relationship you built with a physician, something that deeply inspired you, something that you learned. The more reflective, the more honest, the more non-chat GPT-ish and cliche you can be with something like that, the better you're going to stand out to the admissions committee. So you have the 15 experiences or activities. Now, a lot of people ask me, what if I don't have 15? Well, that's perfectly fine, but there is a balance between quality and quantity, right? So I always say shoot for at least 8 really high quality experiences. I'd definitely prefer you had 10 to 12, but you don't have to force 15. You can include a hobby or 2. In fact, a lot of admissions committees highly encourage this. Try to look for something a little more on the quirky side, unless it's just near and dear to your identity. So if you play soccer every Wednesday and Friday, or even just every Wednesday, and it's something really important to you, you've been doing it since you've been a young person, go for it. Talk about soccer as a hobby. But it's always cool to see a quirky hobby, like somebody who collects broken watches and repairs them, or just collects them, or somebody who does Pokemon cards and goes to trade shows for Pokemon cards, or sells sports cards, or whatever it may be. Whatever your quirky hobby is, maybe you're a photographer on the side, maybe you do filmmaking. Some people do gaming. I get a little nervous about that one, but if you do a good enough job articulating it and how it's a de-stressor and what it does for you, and maybe it's a bonding experience and you've built, kind of a close-knit community through it or whatever, it's perfectly fine. I wouldn't run away from it. Some people do the gym, etc. So hobbies are okay in your work and activities section. Why am I talking about the work and activities section so much? Because it's that important. It ends up being about 3 times the length of your personal statement. And when you have a admissions committee sitting around the table filled with busy physicians and faculty at medical schools who are volunteering their time to read through these things, they wouldn't have this long work and activities section even exist in MCAS if it wasn't something that's highly valuable to them. They wouldn't be rejecting people with 4.0s and 528s if it wasn't highly valuable to them. They're obviously not making their decision exclusively based on the story in your personal statement, although that does have incredible weight. These work and activities tell them a lot about who you are, about the distance traveled, like they like to say. This term, distance traveled, is basically this notion of, how have you built your character throughout your life? When they say distance traveled, you can think about it in a literal sense. Somebody that's kind of, well-seasoned, well-traveled, is usually somebody cultured, somebody that's been around, is open-minded, is, kind of done a lot. And that is one of the purposes of your work and activities section, is to demonstrate that character, that diversity of experience, etc. Now, that's the primary application. Then there's one more piece. There's the other relevant information response. This is where you might discuss a disadvantaged background. In fact, it used to historically be called the disadvantaged status response. This is only a couple cycles ago. And now they've called it the other relevant information response, not because they no longer want to hear about your disadvantages, but because they wanted to broaden the scope a little bit in case you felt like that space was better allocated toward a health setback that you went through, or a gap year that you took, or a gap semester that you had to take in the middle of college, or something that requires explanation. So the other relevant information response is essentially exactly what it sounds like. You want to focus on other relevant information, in other words, not mentioned elsewhere, i.e. in the personal statement or in the work and activities section. If there's something really important that admissions should know about you, or that you may want to explain, not mentioned in the personal statement, which I don't recommend doing anyway, and not mentioned in the work and activities, which if it's something like that usually doesn't make sense in the work and activities, then you want to mention it in the other relevant information response. You only get another 1,325 characters, same length as the extension for those most meaningfuls, about 200, 225 words or so. There's your primary. Boom, you finish that up, you send it out to all the med schools. Now, once again, even when I get people past the point of statistics aren't everything. It's not just about your science GPA, your cumulative GPA, your MCAT score, etc. Even when people get over that, they think it's all the personal statement. Even if I get them to realize that the work and activities are also important, they still don't realize how important secondaries is. Guys, again, 3 stages, equally important. Primaries, secondaries, interviews. Why are secondaries so important? Think about it. It's that specific school's first impression of whether you care about them specifically or not, right? So if they're asking you why UMich or why UNC or whoever it may be, and you have a lackluster response despite an incredible personal statement and a highly polished work and activities, you're basically telling that medical school, hey, I care about getting into medical school. I don't care about you. I presume that this is what a lot of 4.0s and 528s are doing, is they're kind of just winging it during the written application piece, including during secondaries. So secondaries are critical. What are they? They're school-specific essays. How many do you get? It varies, 3, 4, 5. The nature of the prompts vary. What schools ask for vary, but they're critically important. And once you build a bank of content, let's say you do secondaries for 4 or 5 schools, you'll have enough to kind of spread across the other schools. So it's not as much work or as crazy as it sounds like. And then the interview. The interview, you have to walk in and realize that you need to be the verbal version, the talking version of everything that school liked in the app, because guess what? They like you. They wouldn't have interviewed you if they didn't like you. Now, do they like you enough to admit you? Well, part of that depends on how you show up. Are you going to present yourself in a way comparable to the way you presented yourself in the written application? But did they like your written application? Yes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interviewing you. It requires time, money, resources to interview. It's not cheap for schools to interview. Even if it's a Zoom interview, it's taking up their time and energy. They don't want to do it unless they are highly considering you for that program. Does that mean you're most likely to get in? Not necessarily, but you have a really good chance at that point. So put your best foot forward. In fact, I'd say statistically speaking, you are more likely to get in at that point, because if the acceptance rate into medical school itself is like 44%, if you get an interview, it's probably shot up to something like 75. I don't really know, but that's a pretty good guess, I think. So let's stop there for today. Primaries, secondaries, interviews, all equally important. There's a lot of other little things that you can do to distinguish yourself. We'll dig into those more in other videos, but I hope this is a helpful start for you. I'm Dr. Ali, your essay doctor.